Welcome to Grapple Arts Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest Grapple Arts podcast in by far the nicest location that we've ever done. It's coming to you live from Isla Mujeres in Mexico, where I think all future podcasts for anybody should be done. And what brings us to doing a podcast here is a really fortuitous coincidence. So I'm sitting on a little street, I think we've just finished the guacamole and are waiting for the ceviche to arrive. And some dude with slightly banged up ears comes up to me and introduces himself and tells me his name is Jeff Rockwell. Now, I know Jeff. I've known Jeff for like 12 or 13 years because that's how long we've been corresponding online and hanging out in the same forums, but we've never actually met. So it's just such a cool coincidence that this weird conglomeration of the sport where we like to, roll around on the ground, and then also the internet age where you can meet and interact with people from thousands of miles away. In Jeff's case, actually, when we first met, okay, hello everybody, here's Jeff.
Hey guys, hey. Glad to be here. Awesome coincidence, awesome meeting Stephan here.
So, when we first started chatting, where were you? Were you on the East Coast at that point?
Oh man, yeah.
Back in 2003.
2003, I probably still would have been in Northern Virginia, getting ready to move out to Oregon. Because I remember some of those picture clips that I first sent you were taken in Oregon, but our first correspondence was probably even a little earlier. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
What Jeff's referring to there is another really weird coincidence, and I've talked about this on my blog, but once upon a time, in 2002, I was in the Can-Am Police Fire Games competing against this really tough wrestler, and he was trying to pass my guard, and I think I was down by an advantage. And I tried scrambling past my guard, and I ended up catching his legs with my legs and ending up in this really weird position. It's basically like a knee crusher, a knee slicer from the bottom. But at the time, I had no idea how I'd gotten there, and I was hanging on there. I knew he couldn't pass my guard. And as he's trying to get his way past, I'm realizing, wait a second, I could maybe submit him from here. And so I start working on that. He flips out, he bails, I end up on top, I get the sweet points. And that was what decided the match. So, now, unfortunately, the story doesn't have this great ending where I tapped him out with a knee crush on the bottom. But knee crushes hardly ever work in competition. Anyway. And then a little while later, Jeff here emails me out of the blue with a series of photos and text descriptions of this technique that he's been working on that he calls the log splitter.
Well, I think you had called, I was watching one of your original instructional DVDs or videos that you had put out years ago, and you had a sweep that you called the lumberjack, where you grabbed their ankles and had your shins behind their knees and you knocked them over, and it was the lumberjack. And so I thought I was being clever by adapting the theme from lumberjack to log splitter, because you were basically, instead of just knocking their leg over, you were splitting it in half and making it super painful. That was a move that one of my original coaches, Tony Passos, had come up with, and I don't think anyone had ever showed it to him. The submission version of it, where he just stayed on the bottom there and squeezed the hell out of it. And when he was a purple belt, he was killing all of us with it, and we would run away to get away from that horrible technique. And then I took it out to Oregon, and I wasn't able to use it as much as a submission. I don't know why. Whatever reason, I didn't have the
right shin morphology.
The right shin morphology to get the submission as often. But I had a lot of success with it as a sweep. And so I just started, that was the whole thing, it was to lock him in there and use it as a sweep. And I was real successful with it, and that's when we started corresponding about it.
And then, as we've also talked about, I think this technique comes up at fairly regular intervals. It's like every culture out there has discovered how to make alcohol. If they've got anything that they can brew or ferment, it's like, we have wheat, we'll make, wheat-based alcohol.
Absolutely. Honey, whatever you've got.
So in the same way, this technique just won't die. It just keeps on coming up because other people are posting online going, hey, I just discovered this really cool technique. You said just the other day.
Just the other day. Saw a very good black belt out of New York post on Facebook showing the exact same technique, and whether he discovered it on his own or someone else did, either way, it's just as valid. And I don't know what variations he's coming up with, but it's awesome to see that it's still coming around. It's still effective.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there are only so many ways you can bend and twist and torque the human body, and if you've got enough people out there I mean, I don't know how many jiu-jitsu practitioners would be in the world right now, but they're going to be in the 100,000 mark anyway.
Absolutely. It's still growing all the time.
So, I mean, if you've got enough people putting in enough rounds, they're going to slowly discover every possible configuration of way to make someone say uncle.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, just, I mean, we're not even going to try and describe, we can try and describe it, but if you do a search for log splitter online, you should come to, you can see Jeff's original notes that he sent me on my site, and you can see a video of some other people teaching it and stuff, but the essence of it is a calf compressor or a knee slicer.
Sure. You get it a lot from the butterfly guard when you start to kind of either lift them, just kind of a hook lift straight into the air, or maybe a failed hook sweep to one side, and they leave one leg kind of light and dangling behind, and you're able to wedge one shin behind their knee and then fold the leg underneath on the other side. And if you're real slick, you can do it without using your hands. But sometimes you need to use your hand, some handwork in there as well to lock it in. But yeah, I've heard there was one of Eddie Bravo's guys doing it. He was calling it the ham sandwich. I think there was some guys in Texas that called it a Zapooter or somebody after somebody named Zapooter that was doing it down there. I never got to meet Zapooter, but I heard some guys yelling it in a tournament one time, and I was like, wait, no, that's a log splitter. Yeah, it's one of those things where it kind of looks weird and fancy at first, but you put the reps in, you get the feeling, and people will be very scared of it.
Well, anything looks weird when you first do it. You take somebody who's brand new and you show them some fancy technique. If it's got the same number of moves as a not fancy technique, I don't think something's when I started whitewater kayaking, and that was many, many years ago, it was really unusual to see people rolling, right? It was like you'd save the rolls for, and I'd say this is probably even before the time when I started.
Like rolling underwater.
Yeah, rolling underwater. You're going down a rapid, you flip, you roll up, and you would save the roll for, when you were 10 years into your whitewater racing progression. And if somebody flipped in a race and rolled, everyone would stop and the guy would lose the race because he would have lost the time, but it was still an amazing thing to watch. Okay. And now you see guys, then by the time I kind of put a hold on whitewater kayaking after not putting in the hours and not watching my skill levels erode, but wanting to keep on paddling the same difficult stuff and getting washed over a waterfall, which is a whole other story. It's like, okay, maybe I better take it easy here. But by the time I left the sport, temporarily, hopefully, guys were learning, they could roll, and that was all they could do. That was the very first thing that you teach beginners. And there were guys out there who were beginners, and they'd learn to roll with their hands, and they'd flip upside down, and they'd throw away the paddle, and they'd roll up with their hands. And this was light years ahead of where the sport had been 20, 30 years ago. And I think jiu-jitsu is the same way. Yeah. Bringing this back to jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Things that we once considered like rocket science. It's hard to say what the basics are. Yes, there are some techniques that are basic because they work. Arm bar, the straight arm bar, the rear naked choke, they're not going anywhere. Yeah. But there's also tons of stuff that was once thought to be super high level that isn't super high level anymore.
I think the key is that you need to have some kind of tool to address a problem in each given range, and if you...
So can you give me an example?
Well, there are a lot of different ways you can address someone standing over you in the open guard. Mm-hmm. You can play a De La Hiva guard, you can play a spider guard, you can play more of a, what I'd call traditional, like collar and sleeve, foot on the hip guard. You can go toward more like a one-leg X guard type of game. And I messed around with all of those reasonably extensively during my career. And, now I've kind of settled on the one that certain paths that I like the best. But you can see some very high-level people that are successful using any of those, and it's not necessarily even dependent on body type. It's just they've picked a particular game or flow of games that they like to use to address that style or address that range. And, what you can't do is just have a massive hole which doesn't address a certain range. Someone is in a very close thing past the level of your knees. Well, you better have either a good close guard or be able to maneuver in such a way that you can deal with the threats that they're going to present to you in that range potentially if striking's involved, but, with gi chokes or with not gi chokes. That's the other thing I would say. You have to have something that addresses all ranges, but also addresses some of the different variations of jiu-jitsu, the no-gi jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu with striking, and with the gi. So
I'm hoping to circle around to that sort of the striking aspect, keeping it real.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise there's no real good reason to not teach a flexible beginner inverted guard on his very first day of jiu-jitsu. If your only goal is, why don't we get to it right now? If your only goal is to create tournament winners.
Right.
And say with the gi, then there's no reason that you shouldn't be teaching people who have the attributes, inverted guard and berimbolo from day one.
And I think we're seeing some kids in some, academies, you see like the Mendez Academy guys, their kids are berimboloing people to death, right out of the gate. And these kids have only been training a year or two. And it's super impressive to watch. And, I'm not at their academy, but I can only assume that they're going to be teaching their kids some self-defense and some stuff as well. And at some point, they're going to be, well-rounded. And it just depends on their goals at the time. If they're, worried about bully-proofing their kids, there's programs for that and gyms for that and people who emphasize that first and the competition later. If you want to do the competition first, and that's the thing, and that's what gets you into the gym and excited every day, do that, But like we're saying, you just have to make sure you've got some sort of position which addresses all these different scenarios and things,
Well, I guess we're seeing the same evolution in MMA. I'm guessing that in the early days of MMA, if somebody had come and showed you a Superman punch, you would like, get out of town.
Yeah.
Or you run up the side of the cage and you do a jump spinning quick kick.
Oh, my Lord, yeah.
They've got Transformers doing Superman punches in the movies now. Clearly it's a valid technique.
Yeah, the art is imitating life.
So in your teaching, where do you prioritize sort of the self-defense aspect versus the competition aspect? Yeah,
it changes from time to time. It's been changing more, I would say, in the past few years. It just kind of along with my own evolution. There was a while I was competing a good bit, and that was my primary focus. And I think my teaching reflected that. I did come up through some gyms that emphasized self-defense as well. The Pedro Sauer Association that I was part of for a long time emphasized that. And so I have some roots there, and I always like to get back to them eventually. Whenever there's just so much, how it is. There's just so much in jiu-jitsu, and you get excited about teaching. Oh, I got to teach this, one leg X guard sweep to this pass to this thing. Otherwise, my students aren't going to be ready when they go to the tournament. But at the same time, okay, we got to learn how to escape the headlocks, and it was definitely a wake up call for me. It was a couple of years ago. I was, teaching some classes to some high level people down in Austin, Texas, and some really good like purple belts and brown belts and people that had, were medaling at some IBJJF competitions and doing really well. And all of a sudden I figured out one day that they had no idea how to defend a punch, just goofing around. I'm like, well, and any kind of haymaker to all these different things or headlock stuff, they just had none of it. So I was like, you know what? All right, every Friday now on, I'll put the gloves on and I'm going to hit you and we're going to work on some more fundamental stuff like that. Because as, even as a sport jiu-jitsu or a jiu-jitsu instructor who likes to emphasize the sport, you can't have somebody going out and representing you and say, hey, I'm a martial arts instructor, and this person they don't know how to fight. They don't know how to defend
themselves. Get in my guard. Yes. Get in my guard.
Exactly. We've seen that parody so many times on television or in on cartoons or memes where the jiu-jitsu guy is just a butt-flopping, fool, and we're not going to let that happen. We got to make sure that people know some takedowns, know some wrestling, know some judo. You don't have to be, high level, in any of those things, but you have to be good enough that you've got to be able to handle yourself.
I don't think people look at butt flopping as a modern phenomenon, and it certainly is.
Right.
But I know somewhere in my library of self-defense books, which I started collecting when I think I bought my first one when I was 8. And then, so probably hundreds and hundreds of books.
Yeah.
Somewhere I've got a book that advocates if somebody pulls a knife on you, flop onto your back, and you've got a quarter inch or half inch of armor on the bottom of your feet. You don't have that armor anywhere, and use your shoes to essentially, kick the shins and defend against a knife. And if you've got shoes on and you're a good runner, I mean, you can put those shoes to other uses as well. But it's not entirely a stupid idea in the right situation.
Sure.
So actually, I would make an argument that the butt flopping has its.
Well, it's interesting because I've talked to some different people teaching self-defense things or researching self-defense things, and the hair grab seems to be something that I know you've had a lot of trouble with, over the years. Everybody grabbing your hair.
Well, I did have shoulder-length curly hair and a big Jesus beard too.
Are you serious?
I was the squarest hippie.
Oh my goodness.
that could ever.
Wow, I'm sorry I didn't get to see that. Maybe you're gonna have to send me some pictures after this. But
okay, sorry.
But the head. I mean, when teaching self-defense for women or just in general, having somebody grab your hair, get their fingers up in it, and starting to whip you around. You can find a million YouTube videos of people just getting thrashed that way. And so I've tried to do some research of what are the best ways to defend against that. And of course, there's some jiu-jitsu videos out there. Well, I'll grab his hands, I'll turn away and apply an arm lock with my elbow. Maybe. All right.
Sort of Aikido jiu-jitsu style.
Kind of, I mean, it's in the Brazilian jiu-jitsu curriculum, but it's a long way from the YouTube videos of people being whipped around by their head from them being able to do something like that.
And it's so common, as you point out. Watch any fight between two girls.
Yeah.
I'll say 99% of the time.
Yeah.
If it goes on for more than 5 seconds, both of them have latched onto each other's hair.
Absolutely.
Any two fights with guys with long hair.
Yeah.
Especially, and the stereotype is if they're Canadian, because they're all used to hockey fighting.
The hockey fight.
Grab the jersey with one hand and dummy them with the other. And if there's no jersey, then the mullet will have to do.
The mullet's there. I think it's instinctual. So anyway, but in talking to one high-level guy, Burton Richardson, he had told me that, I don't think that he is aware of any perfect defense or thinks it's the best, but the one that he's had some success with is just what you're saying, is basically someone grabs two fingers or two fistfuls of your hair and it starts to whip you. You grab onto their hands with both hands and then you sit down, pull guard, your feet on their hips. And now you're blasting them in the hips, you're blasting them in the groin with their feet. Odds are they're going to be letting go of your hair, and now you're working to stand up in base and and get away. It's not a great solution. You don't want to be on your back, like that, but it's a solution. And I've started to do a little bit of experimentation with some of the ladies and stuff that I work with, but not all of them are super thrilled about training hair grabs. So we're I don't know, we need to come up with some sort of training wig. Yeah, exactly. I haven't got that developed yet, but it's interesting.
We'll cut out this part of the podcast. We'll file the patent. I think this is where the riches in jiu-jitsu.
Yes, it always misses me. It always passes me by.
Yeah. Well, you missed out on the sleeve choke watch
right
from years ago.
Oh, I almost got one of those.
You too?
I mean, no, I almost did. I thought about it. I was like, man, it's kind of cool, but I didn't get one.
Yeah. Have you worked with a lot of law enforcement in your day?
I have not in an official basis. Like going to a training academy or anything like that, teaching official classes. But I've been fortunate enough both to have a bunch of my students who are law enforcement and just training partners and things like that over the years. And I really believe in what they do in law enforcement and how important they are, and appreciate their work. They have an incredibly difficult job, and the ones that are able to come train jiu-jitsu are fortunate. Because it's unfortunate that there's not enough training usually provided by the departments and by the academies and things like that. They get some really cursory, handcuffing techniques.
Technique number 1, technique number 2.
Yeah. And without, as without consistent training of, going against people who are resisting, at high levels of energy, it's very difficult to really learn how to control somebody under stress. When that person is, cranked up on adrenaline,
well, both people are cranked up.
Well, yeah, exactly, too. Yeah. So,
fine motor skills go to crap, and
they do. We all know that. And so I think it's That's one thing I think that we can really offer the law enforcement community that helps not only the officers but also the citizens that they're trying to protect is our jiu-jitsu training. And obviously not as much the berimbolo stuff and that side of the art, but just the concepts of body control and how to deal with someone and controlling the points of the body without having to go to weapons, without having to strike them. Not to say that, there's a lot of controversy in the media these days about, should this cop have shot this guy? Should he was unarmed, he shot an unarmed person. Well, it's just because someone is unarmed doesn't mean they're not terribly dangerous and potentially lethal. And a lot of that has been well documented. So we shouldn't second guess too much in those situations, but we know that the more training we have and the more confidence you have in your skill and your ability to control someone without having to escalate that level of force, man, the police are going to be safer, the citizens are going to be safer. It's just going to be better all the way around.
I had a really disturbing experience a few years ago. I'm going to change names and places to protect the innocent. But I was at a martial arts seminar. And there were a whole bunch of people, mostly martial artists, but there was a group of 8 or 9 or 10 police recruits who were going through their rookie class, who decided to attend. And in the course of the training, you got to clinch up with all of them, you got to do some basic stuff on the ground. And once you've been doing jiu-jitsu for a while, you clinch up with somebody, you can sense right away whether they have, I don't even mean train, well, you can sense that they have training, but you can also sense if they have some kind of kinesthetic awareness, some kind of body awareness, and just a natural sense of making base.
Sure.
And out of that group of, I'll say, 10 recruits, one guy was this big bodybuilder kind of guy, and he was strong and aggressive, and he could, he didn't know what he was doing, but at least if you pushed him, he pushed back.
Right.
He didn't fall over. And the smallest person in that group was this really hyper-aggressive girl. And she, again, didn't know what she was doing, but she would fight, right? She had that sense of resistance. The other 8 were completely useless. It was, you would tie up with them and they'd put both feet one beside the other, and if you turned, they would fall over. It was, I don't know what hiring protocol that department used, but it was terrible because I guess maybe they're so paranoid about weeding out anybody who could be perceived as a jock. And now here I'm pontificating on something I really have no personal knowledge of, but something about their hiring process, that department's hiring process, wasn't picking up was making sure to weed out anybody who had any sense of athleticism. I mean, even if the people had been playing ultimate frisbee or something, they would have had a sense of if I'm changing direction, I need to put a foot here.
Right. And so much of their job is going, hands-on against resisting people, whether it's for some sort of major crime or some sort of just petty felony. It's like, okay, come along, let's go do this, let's get in the back of the car. And just the advantage that a grappler has in any of those situations to be able to control someone without injuring that person is just massive. And, I've talked to some of my students recently who are law enforcement. I've got a guy who's on a local SWAT team, and he's just, laments the fact that his department just doesn't have enough funds to, any training that he does to get this stuff that's going to help keep him safe and help keep the citizens safe. He has to pay for on his own. He has to do it on his own time and everything like that. And that's a logistical problem that's outside of my realm of knowledge to suggest a solution for. But it seems, I've just thought about this myself and just, man, knowing what I know now, just, as a black belt, not a very good one, but a black belt and with some experience, I would feel naked going out to be a police officer and try to do a police officer's job without jiu-jitsu, without at least like a high blue to purple belt level of jiu-jitsu. I would feel like I am being sent out to the wolves with nothing to, protect myself except a gun. And that, they don't even get that much training with that. They qualify a couple times a year for the most part. There's obviously different units.
No, I mean, you gotta be able to pull guard and flying armbar. You go out on the street and try to arrest somebody and you don't know how to flying armbar them. I don't know what to do.
That's
a joke. That was a very funny joke. Just before I get thousands of angry emails.
Right. You'll see the post down at the bottom for that.
Yeah. Flame away.
Comment section.
Yeah. I was involved with another police department once when they'd had a couple officers have some really close calls on the street.
Yeah.
And again, they didn't have any funding. But one of the cops there was a training partner of mine, and he asked if I wanted to do a joint. He and I could do something informal and off the books. Mm-hmm. And it had to be informal and off the books because neither of us are official certified defensive tactics people. Sure. And also, we were going to completely ignore, oh boy, I'm now really going to have to change names. We're going to pass over the whole escalation of force protocol because I think in most systems, by the time you're getting to things like the rear naked choke, that comes after billy clubbing the guy, that comes after tasering him. Right. That's like one step before shooting him. Right. And I guess that comes out of a bunch of lawsuits that came from people applying the rear naked choke incorrectly. Or not providing proper post-unconsciousness care, mm-hmm. people asphyxiating positionally and other things. This was years ago, before the recent spate of high publicity police incidents. So we ended up doing it at a joint police fire hall. And it was funny because a bunch of the firefighters came and a bunch of the cops came. And I remember teaching we taught the first lesson, this is the guard, this is the mount, here's how to get out of the mount, here's how to pass the guard, take the back, choke him out, something like that. It was like, we'll give you a little module of stuff, it's kind of cool, and then as the weeks go on, we'll give you more. And at the end, I went with my friend, and we were like, okay, you guys just train, just practice what we've shown you, and we're just going to debrief here. We're talking about, how did you think that went? Did we do this? And we turn around, and the police are going through the steps one by one. Okay, first, it was mount, and then I put my foot here, and I put my hand there, and I bridge, and the firefighter side of the room was just a giant dust pile, like a Royal Rumble. Like
they just wanted to go
5 on 5. Yeah, it's pretty much WWE, and I think that encapsulates maybe the difference between law enforcement and firefighting better than anything else I can.
Interesting.
A big dog pile of alpha male wannabes, right. Kicking the crap out of each other. So
that's good.
So then, when you have work, I guess if a cop comes to you and he's your student, he's probably coming to you for jiu-jitsu, not for sort of a defensive tactics point of thing.
Yeah. A bit of both. Obviously, they know, and what if they tell me they're a police officer and, they say, hey, I want to get in this to feel better about being on the job. Obviously, I'm going to take some of those things into account. I've done some private lessons on those sorts of things specifically. But, if it's a normal jiu-jitsu class, they're going to just train what everyone else is training. I may take them aside if I'm thinking of a position or something and be like, oh, hey, for knee on belly, you may want to think about, controlling his hands or looking to see where his hands are, as opposed to putting we're putting the hands in the collar to choke the guy, in the class. But, you might want to think about this as well. Just any kind of general jiu-jitsu training is going to help. Yes. Even if you're teaching, I've got a 6'4", 220 cop that comes and trains with us, and he's never going to, be a smooth, like he's strong as hell, but he's a little stiff, he's never going to be a smooth berimboloer, and that's not going to help him on the street. But just training his body awareness and grappling in general, anything we do is going to help. But yeah, there are some basics and some fundamentals that I try to stress with those guys and, always talk about, okay, this is what you might want to think about as far as weapon retention, and I'm not an expert in any of those things by any means, but I have thought about it.
What you are an expert on, Jeff, is the training method. I mean, as I talked about on the podcast before, and this comes from Dan Inosanto, so 100% of the credit goes to him.
There you go.
So martial art, there's sort of three things. There are the techniques that make up the martial art. Straight armbar from guard, bridge and roll, escape from mount. Those are the techniques. There's the training method, how you train those techniques. Do you train them, okay, repeat technique number 1 25 times, both sides? Or do you have some level of live resistance and sparring in there? And then there's the training equipment. And the training equipment makes a very big difference, because if we were training grappling outside on the street here in Isla Mujeres, out on the pavement.
Cobblestone.
Cobblestone. It would look very different from the training that we would do in a dojo on mats.
Right.
I think the incentive to be a top player would be much stronger. What you are an expert on is the training method of training people how to move and how to train something with resistance, right? Like, and that's what I think a lot of the police training lacks, because they don't really say, okay, well, for the most part, okay, one person puts on a gun, the other person, and it goes in the guard. The other person's entire job is to try and pull that gun out and go.
Yes.
And you're allowed to punch, you're allowed to choke, you're allowed to armbar, but if you hold the gun out, you win automatically.
Right.
And you wouldn't have to do that very many times in a year, as long as you're doing it with full resistance, and then knowing it's going to be your turn soon, to have a huge edge. And that'd be the exact same training method as you telling a bunch of guys, like, okay, you're going to start in knee mount. One person's got one hand in the collar. The person on the bottom gets out, gets to any other position, they win.
Right.
And go.
Which is what we do every night,
Positional training.
every day, positional training class. Yeah, I'm a big believer in it. Yeah, and of course there are programs, there are police academies and programs that do just the kind of training that you're talking about. There are a lot of private contractor type of programs that offer these service to police and law enforcement things. But a lot of the times, like you say, just for the average and, the average cop, the average person on the street, their department probably doesn't have the funding,
and they're worried about liability.
Liability, and they're getting injured.
Much safer to teach technique number 1, technique number 2.
Yes.
To have a dog pile.
Yes.
My
student was just saying how his supervisor is always getting on him about don't get injured. And he honestly does not encourage the guys to go out and train jiu-jitsu and these different things, because he's afraid that they'll get hurt and they're going to get stuck on desk duty, and then who's he going to have to patrol? Okay, that's a legit concern, and I'm not sure exactly how it needs to be addressed, but man, we need these guys and gals who are our blue line of defense to have the skills to protect themselves and to protect us.
Just sell it to the supervisor. Say, look, there's a good chance the guy's going to get cauliflower ears, and he'll look much tougher.
That's true. Cauliflower ears, at least if your opponent knows what to look for, they can settle, some disputes without even, violence having to arise. You're like, oh man, that guy looks kind of scared.
Or hey, you train jiu-jitsu too? Cool.
Yeah, that's true. Or it just...
I was going to be a real asshole and resist arrest here, but let's get it. One time I was driving from training Kali, so the Filipino martial arts.
Yeah.
And I stop at a red light, and at the time the squeegee kid thing was big, right? The squeegee kids, they'd come out with a squeegee and some water, and they'd squeegee your window, and then they'd beg for change.
Oh, right.
And the kid comes out, I wave him off. He does my window anyway. I'm kind of irritated. I roll down the window and go, look, I really wish you hadn't done that. And he looks in, he sees the Kali sticks lying there, and goes, hey, you do Kali too? I go, yeah, where did you train? He goes, Makoto Kabayama in Toronto. I go, no way, I trained with him too. So I went, in the space of 15 seconds, went from pissed off at the guy.
Right.
For touching my car. I don't know why the car is such a sacred object. Don't touch my car, man.
Yeah, for some people, for sure.
And this was a beat up Toyota Tercel, so it's like...
It's the principle. It's the principle.
It's the principle. And in the space of 10 seconds, we had this giant turnaround. So maybe cauliflower ears, maybe prosthetic cauliflowers.
You want a little. You don't want too much. You just want enough.
Yeah, exactly. Says a guy with just a little.
Just a little. I never had to have the surgery.
No?
No.
Did you ever train them yourself?
I have trained him a couple times. I just got done training one of my students a couple weeks ago. What? It's he asked me to. But yeah, I
guarantee that if I ask you to give me, plastic surgery and then it doesn't work out.
Ooh, that's true.
And then I can still sue you. I guarantee. Anyhow, okay. So you're a trusting student.
Yes.
So, somebody helped somebody else drain
this doesn't give him ideas. Yeah, someone else drained his ear. It wasn't me. But that how that happens every now and then. But most of my cauliflower always kind of went down on its own. But the right ear's got a little hanging around.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, I remember going after trying to drain it myself. I went and did my research, and I went to the drugstore. Do you guys sell any hypodermics? Or I decided insulin needles. Apparently they're too small, but whatever.
You can get some stuff out with
them. Get some stuff out. So I go, do you guys sell insulin needles? And they go, we do, for diabetics. Looking at me as if because I think I was at the stage where I was pretty big. I was pushing 225. And as that failed quest to make it to 240 with abs. Well, the things stupid young men do. My goal was 240 with abs and no steroids. So I was at 220, peaked out at 228. So at about 225, I had to go get my ears drained. So I was a big guy.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking that I'm trying to inject, I've run out of needles to shoot testosterone into my bum.
Straight into the buttocks.
So I finally convinced them to let me have some to drain my ears, which I don't think made them much happier, but at least it gave them a reason.
Say, look at this thing.
Yeah.
Have you seen the new thing? There's like magnets or something now.
I haven't seen them. I've heard of them.
Yeah,
the rare earth magnets.
Rare? I don't even know what that means.
It means super strong.
Super strong.
Yeah. It's like give two of these to a kid, and if they swallow both of them, they can die because they'll bring they basically fold their intestines. If they get separated, you swallow one, and then you swallow one half an hour later. They'll find each other, and they'll basically tie the intestines in a knot. Is my understanding.
That's a terrible picture. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well.
So don't let your 1-year-old masticate your cauliflower ear rare earth magnets.
My youngest is 6 right now, but I probably should still keep him away from him. He's kind of like a little Wolverine. He's a little crazy person, so I'm not going to let him near those.
Yeah. So you're going to try those rare earth magnet things?
Hopefully my cauliflower ear days are done. I try to keep people off my head most of the time, but for some of my students, check it out. You never know. That way I won't have to stick needles in their ears.
There's one advantage of having a slightly bum neck is that you get less cauliflower because you're continuously protecting your head.
Yes.
In these days of oh man, grab onto my head and I'll just climb around and wrench it out and take your back.
Yeah, those days are done. Yeah.
As are your days of playing certain types of half guard.
Yeah. Half guard. Yeah.
Well, some of them are okay, the longer distance ones, but the close in, like
the deep underhook ones.
Yeah, the deep underhook ones are tough because everybody just starts going for some variation of the Bravo or just mashing their head down to try and fight for their own underhook. Mm-hmm. Actually, I should ask Bernardo Faria about this, but I find that the deep underhook, or the deep half guard is the same way. You get the deep half guard, guys are just pushing on your head.
Yeah, your core and neck strength. I played a bit of deep half for a while, then I went away from it, and now I've come back to it, but I don't hang out there long. If I get there, I try to use it right away and move, and if I don't, kind of bail or do something else, as opposed to kind of being well, here I am in deep half. All right, now I'm going to start the game. It's if I get there, I'm going right away and using it because, like you say, anybody worth their salt is going to immediately start crunching you up with the posture of your spine, your head, and start bashing on your head, and things can go from real good to real bad pretty quick. But yeah, I think even as I've been teaching it to some of my students more recently, they're like, "Wow, you gotta really have your posture tight and your core extended and have some strength in this position to make this work." I'm like, yeah, you do. you can either have big biceps and throw the guy off you, or you can learn the jiu-jitsu and have your core strength be good. But
use proper structure.
You're going to need some sort of structural strength.
Yeah. Well, I guess at its core, it's really, you could call it not a variation of X guard, but it's on the continuum because essentially you're forcing something. This can sound really bad. Forcing something big between your opponent's legs. Okay. Let's forcing your opponent's knees apart.
You're just digging the hole deeper now.
Okay, I'm digging. Okay. Well, in the case of X guard, you're inserting from your shoulder to your insteps, from your opponent's ankle essentially to his knee, and destabilizing them that way. In the case of deep half guard, you're essentially using the same body parts. Yeah. Well, maybe not your insteps as well, depending on the type.
Yeah.
But you're using your torso, your shoulder, and part of your legs to make the opponent do the splits. Just finally found a PG way of saying it.
That was
You're making your opponent do the splits by using your own body.
Using your own body, you've got their hips over your hips, and create that instability. Yeah.
So what's some things that you've been working on recently?
Oh, well,
Jiu-jitsu-wise,
this past year, I did a project with a guy named Marshall Carper, who's done some different jiu-jitsu books and products. We made it's an ebook, but it's kind of an interactive video ebook as well. It exists in the cloud, which I only half understand, but it's on a defensive system called the Situp Escape. The Situp Escape system is the name of it, and It's something that I've worked on a lot for the past maybe 5 years or so, and it really has really changed the way that I play my guard. I'm able to play my guard. I'm able to recover my guard. I'm able to escape bad positions from side control, mount, the back, everything.
So when you say sit up, escape, it's that Marcelo Garcia style of.
It is. It's
for the lack of.
No, hey, I am. You know, there's some guys I think now that have probably surpassed me, you know, with their youthful fervor as far as being Marcelo Garcia's biggest fan. But for a while, I felt as though in my heart I was vying for that title. And I just, you know, of course, love everything about the guy. But man, when I really started to study his defensive game, it struck me as something just incredibly unique that you really didn't get to see a whole lot of in his competition or tournament matches, because he's almost always on offense. He's just killing people. But when you get to watch him in the gym and get to watch him on MG in action, man, he has this incredible defensive recovery system. And so I really started...
So if the guy's working on getting past the guard, doesn't quite... But not fully solidified.
Yeah, and there's all different levels of it.
Because even when he's fully solidified, he does the same bloody thing.
Most of the time he does. Every now and then he'll shrimp. Every now and then, a great while. But most of the time he's working some other aspect of this system. So basically, all I did was kind of, although I have been fortunate to train with Marcelo a few times, I was only able to glean a little bit of it during those times. Most of it was just watching it and kind of reverse engineering it and testing it out. And you can, as a plug for MG in action, you could pretty much do that with any part of his game at this stage. There's so much on there, so much live footage, and so much instruction. It's all there. So there are certain aspects of the system for sure that I discovered on my own, and or other things that people taught me that I was able to put into it. And some of it, you know, my own trial and error. But
so you're using it to prevent guard passes. You're using it to escape side mount.
Yes.
You're using it to...
You can escape side mount. You can escape the mount. You can escape... You'd be surprised where it's one of those crazy things. Like once you understand the principles of the framing and how to use momentum in your body to keep yourself safe, you'd be surprised of the times when it seems like it might be a bad idea to sit up, where it's actually a pretty good idea. And, you know, I always, when I'm teaching the system to people, I say, when in doubt, sit up. If you can't sit up going to your right, there's probably an opening to sit up to your left if you understand the concepts. And of course, there's a ton of what if scenarios that come in. Oh, what if I miss this? And he starts to get my back. And the good thing is, there's almost always a solution, and there's almost always another step, and we have it answered. And it's kind of a big circular wheel. I made a ton of flowcharts and different things, you know, for my own use as I was figuring things out. And
it doesn't surprise me at all about you. And but it's to the benefit of the people who are training with you or learning from you in a digital format.
Well, you know, what's so cool is that, you know, like I was able to learn remotely from Marcelo, you know, as you and I were able to exchange ideas so many years ago. Now there's people coming up to me or emailing me and being like, hey, thanks so much for showing me this, you know, on the internet, or I bought your sit-up escape system thing and it's changing everything and it works so well. And it's such a cool feeling to be like, wow, I never met that person in my life, but they, you know, the type of content and the type of stuff we're able to transfer these days is amazing.
Well, before we start the podcast, we were both reminiscing about some of the early forums that you and I were both on, like Mausel's. And some of our listeners will remember that.
That's right.
And then there was On the Mat.
On the Mat.
Scotty Nelson's
Yes. Submissionfighting.com before it became MMA.tv. I think that's what it still is now.
NHB Gear.
Yep.
While people still knew what NHB stood for.
Right. Yeah. That term, I don't know, it's slipped away. But yeah, we used to spend so many, hours. I remember literally just, printing out pages worth of instructions that other people had typed up on how to do this one move from the guard. And okay, man, you take your right hand and you put it behind their arm, and they're trying to describe an arm drag from the guard to me, and it takes them 3 pages to do it. But
you weren't allowed to post photos.
Right.
YouTube didn't exist. This is the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
YouTube didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
there was no such thing as the videos. There was the Panther production VHS tapes that you could buy, but besides that, jiu-jitsu was all either just taught in an academy or we were just trying to exchange stuff as best we could online.
I wonder on those old forums how many people, if there's an early form of trolling, like put your left hand here, then put your left hand there, just in a way that made it impossible to follow.
There may have been a few.
Take your third hand and... But it didn't seem like it. It seemed like people were mostly genuinely interested in trying to pass on the stuff through an incredibly inefficient, in retrospect, process. I mean, the young folks these days, they just don't know how good they got it with the YouTubes.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think to be fair, jiu-jitsu, for the most part, everybody gets so excited about it that sometimes maybe some people do it a little bit too soon or too enthusiastically, but we love it so much that we love those aha moments that we get for ourselves. We're like, oh, that is so cool. I can't believe I never saw this before. We want to share that. And so people are, whether it was typing it out in the old days of, how to do that stuff or now just, boom, you can make videos and shoot stuff so quick and share it.
And the advantage of jiu-jitsu compared to something like boxing is there's a far greater number of discoveries that can be made.
Right.
There's only so many ways you can tweak the jab.
Right.
Or, I don't know, bob and weave.
Yeah.
Yes, there are subtleties there.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's easy to do. It takes years of training.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, knowing, okay, move your body this way, then like it doesn't translate the same way as learning a new jiu-jitsu technique or a new sort of principle that you can then apply in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yes.
Throughout your jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
So it's a really, really exciting time to be involved in. Well, the last 10, 15 years, I mean, jiu-jitsu has probably involves more in a year now than it did in 20 years.
I'm so angry at Keenan Cornelius. As soon as he came out with the worm guard, I was like, nope, that's it. I can't learn anything new. Like it's just too much. Like I've learned everything, every new trend. I'm like, well, all right, Barambolo. I don't think I'll use it, but I need to learn it and understand it so I can learn how to take it apart and maybe teach it if I need to, whatever. And then he came out with the worm guard, and I was like, nope, I'm checking it out, Keenan. But like
jumping straight to the reverse inverted Della worm guard.
Exactly. There's just too much now. There's too much. But you're right. I can't. It's amazing how quickly it's continuing to evolve. And now, I mean, at least for the no-gi, the trend seems to be going back to leg locks with all these guys just killing each other.
Well, that was inevitable. That was inevitable. Yeah. I think it was really a cultural change. The technique of yes. The Tonins and Cummins of the world are tweaking it in some interesting new ways. But the gross technique, the heel hook, say, has been out there for 25 years.
Yeah.
It's really required a shift in the culture to allow it to be used. And in the rule set as well, obviously. You had to have some things occur outside of the IBJJF with their crusade against leg locks, really.
Yes, leg locks, reaping, all that stuff. Yeah.
And there's lots of stories of guys in the 90s using leg locks in tournaments. They were totally legal, and there are pictures of Helio Gracie doing leg locks.
Heel hooks in the gi. There's a video floating around somewhere on YouTube or on Facebook right now. Yeah, of showing Helio, from one of the DVDs or something like that, the old instructional DVDs of doing a heel hook straight up in the gi, and people are like, what would Helio say? Yeah. Helio, would approve.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is one of those evolutionary things, like the role existed in, rolling your kayak existed in kayaking for the last 50 years. It's existed, like the Inuit were doing it 1,000 years ago. So the technique has existed for a long time. And then it gets adopted quickly. So that's a good example of, whereas the Barambolo or the worm guard, I'm sure somebody has spun through upside down to take the person's back and then kind of forgot about it or never passed it on. That's an example of a new technique coming along and being adopted.
Right.
And there's, there may be an example in some old judo book somewhere of somebody doing it, but by and large, it was not in play.
It seems as though it couldn't have been, at least on such a massive scale. It's like, okay, maybe there were 3 guys over there in Japan who had figured it out and were doing it, but did they have as much free time on their hands as, a lot of people have in America to dedicate to this stuff? And as far as the constant flow of knowledge, coming in from the internet and instructionals.
And it might not have been Japan. There's some weird-ass silat out there as well, where they are latching onto a leg and spinning underneath and stuff that, some of which looks suicidal from our point of view until you realize that they're pulling themselves into mount, but the other hand has got a knife and is busy slicing a femoral artery. Okay. Right. So, but some of which translates, my old story with the omoplata. When I discovered the omoplata, there's air quotes, I saw it first in Indonesian silat, long before I ever saw it in jiu-jitsu.
Really?
And
I'd forgotten that one.
Then I introduced it into my jiu-jitsu, and I thought I had invented a brand new technique. That's awesome. As it turns out, there were a couple guys doing it. Yeah. I remember watching some tournament from Brazil that had been bootlegged and sent to me, and it's like, holy crap, they're using my technique. And it's some, Fabio Gurgel, I think. So,
Nino Schembri.
Yeah. I'm guessing that these guys have been doing it for a while. Oh well, so much for being a jiu-jitsu genius. But, it is possible that there were other martial arts doing similar things.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that recent thing that looked at the breakdown of submissions in tournaments, gi and no gi, and for 2015?
I didn't see the 2015 one. I've seen some similar things like that in the past, but probably not the most recent one.
Yeah. Well, I tweeted it out because it was so interesting. In no gi, there was a huge jump in leg locks. I think leg locks, maybe even as specific as heel hooks, were the second most popular submission. I think that might have been grouping like all belt ranks together, including belt ranks that aren't allowed to do leg locks. So now if you say blue belt and above, or I don't know, whatever advanced ranking and above, certainly in the Eddie Bravo tournaments now,
right.
I'd be surprised if heel hooks aren't the most popular submission there.
Like you say, there's now being some other tournaments coming out to kind of rival the prestige of the IBJJF stuff. They're getting the big name guys. A lot of the guys still compete at IBJJF, but they're getting those big name guys to compete in these other tournaments with fewer rules, and they're making it exciting formats, and they're getting a lot of exposure. And so the people coming up are saying, "Oh, well, I don't necessarily have to train for those. Look at my heroes are now doing these other tournaments. I want to train for those tournaments. I want to train under that rule set." And I think, depending on the rules of the gym, the training and things like that, I do think you have to be careful with some of those locks. But, I know that you're an old Eric Paulson student, and I was as well for back in the day. And we learned heel hooks right off the bat, right off day one. Actually probably I knew more variations of those than I knew mount escapes, and things like that back in the day.
Catch wrestler.
Yeah. So I think it's important to at least be able to defend them, have some basic knowledge.
At least have the awareness and the wherewithal that your cotton one should know to tap out.
Yeah.
I think, despite my just going on about leg locks, I'm sounding pretty old. I feel pretty old when I say this, but I have my reservations about the huge popularity of heel hooks.
Yeah.
I think there are going to be a lot of young people get their knees completely messed up because they don't have, they, in their minds, they're competing for the honor of their school, the honor of the jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't want to miss their next belt promotion, so they're not going to tap. I think the happy medium would be removing that, in my opinion, not so great leg reaping rule and allowing gi and no gi to, in an IBJJF setting, to go ahead with the straight ankle lock. I think the straight ankle lock, you can hurt people with it, but it's a pretty good surrogate. If you get really good at the straight ankle lock,
heel hook's no problem.
The heel hook's no problem.
Yeah.
Right? It's pretty easy to adjust your grip. Yeah, there's some nuances for sure. But if you can learn how to control the person's control the person's leg, stop them from standing up, pinch their leg so he can't spin around very easily and just pull out. You've learned 80% of the hard stuff. And now how you finish it is a moot point.
Yeah, so you're saying straight ankle lock, but with the leg reaping allowed, so maybe to allow some of those entangled I can't even remember the different rides that they call them when you're putting the foot behind the knee and things like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't seen any injuries ever from just that leg reaping stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen injuries from leg locks for sure.
Yeah.
And I've seen injuries on the mat for sure. And I've seen leg injuries, but, put somebody in a leg reaping position and their knee explodes. I've never seen it.
Still haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Waiting for that knee to spontaneously combust as soon as it crosses the hip line there.
Okay. Well, I think we're coming close to the end because I think there are some lobster tacos calling my name.
We got to get to those.
And, the sun's going down. The storming of the day has finished. So we're going to grab our various compatriots here and head out. If people want to check out your book, search for.
If you just go into Google and you search for the Situp Escape System, it is the first thing that will come up. And if you want to go directly to it, you just go to artichokemedia.com/Situp Escape System, and each of those last words has a little dash between it. But Google's the easiest way.
But that's Arte.
Oh,
A-R-T-E. It's not artichoke the vegetable.
No, it's Art. Yeah, Art-E-Choke Media. It's a very clever play on words that Marshall has come up with. But that's his.
Just stick with the Google.
Google search is easy.
And if people are out east, you used to be out east, then you went out west, then you went down south.
Yes.
Now you're back east.
Now I'm back east. I've been a traveling man. I'm back in State College, Pennsylvania. I have a small gym, but on my website is raptorbjj.com, and have classes 6 days a week. Just shoot me an email or a text or something, and come on in and train with us.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. It's been fantastic to put a face to a name is a bit too strong, but a real life body to a cyber friend.
Absolutely. So. It's been great, Stephan.
All right.
Thanks
so much.
Yep.